You see loads of people doing like VO2 max type sessions, like 6 times 800 off a 2-minute 30 jog recovery. It's pointless. It's got no relationship to the marathon whatsoever. People believe that H ions are a byproduct of lactate. They're not. The simple fact of the matter is all the stuff on zone 2 training is wrong, on threshold's wrong as well. And if you run a really good half marathon 4 weeks before a marathon, it means you're not in good marathon shape.
On this episode of RNT Fitness Radio, I'm joined by my running coach, John Starrett, aka the Stablemaster. In the past 7 years alone, John's taken over 700 people to sub 3 hours in the marathon and over 200 to break 2 hours 30. The best bit is these aren't elite runners, and that's why for my own sub 3 hour marathon goal this year, I hired John.
Now we've rewired the body and we've got them running like a...
If you want to take 20, 40, even 60 minutes off your marathon time in the next 12 to 18 months, then you're going to love this marathon masterclass with John Starrett, aka the Stablemaster, who's coached over 700, he'll correct me in the video, over 700 normal average people to sub 3 hour marathons and over 200 people to a sub 2:30. We're going to cover everything from what to do if you're currently over 4 hours, from how to go to 4 to 3, and how to go from 3 to 2:30. So get your paper and pen ready, get ready to take some notes, and I think you're going to love this. I filmed this when I was out in a 10 at the home of running champions on a Coaching the Coaches courses, but also to soak up what running with the Kenyans is all about. My big goal in 2025 is to break the sub 3 hour marathon on my first attempt. So in this podcast with John, you're going to understand some of the methodologies I'm using to go from complete beginner to a sub 3 hour marathon.
Okay, so I'm in the beautiful Rift Valley here with Coach John Starrett. Welcome to the RNT Fitness Radio.
Thanks for having me on, the Cash. Looking forward to this. Like you said there, absolutely stunning setting.
Yeah, amazing. So we're out in a tent today, and I thought it'd be the perfect time to share with the world all the knowledge that's inside your head. So to kick it off, so people know why they should be listening to this, what are your PBs as an athlete, but more importantly, your track record as a coach?
Yeah, as an athlete, not too great. I was sort of kind of tinkering on national standard as a junior, but my PBs were 3:57 for the 1500, 14:57 for the 5000, 31:15 for 10k, and 68:17 for a half marathon. But I've never ran a marathon.
Amazing. And as a coach?
Yeah, I suppose like, I've been coaching since I was probably about 20 years of age. I'm now 60, so 40 years I've been coaching. But I suppose the main track record would be in the last 10 years with the online coaching. So previously I'd coached down at the track with the clubs and things like that. But now with the advent of the online coaching, and I suppose I started it properly in 2017, I've coached for, I think, 738 people to sub 3 marathon, 232 to sub 2:30. I've had in the last 3 US Olympic trials, I've had athletes in the last 3 of them. And in the Sapporo Olympics, I had one woman in the marathon, and I've coached several sort of veteran Masterclass European winners. But the main buzz for me, I suppose, is the sub 3. I love getting people to sub 3.
So when you say you've coached 738 people sub 3, what type of people are we talking about? Is it the everyday person like myself, or are we talking about athletes? Like, what does that look like?
Everyday person. I think in the last 3 years, I've had 7 people go from slower than 4 hours to under 3 within a year or 14 months.
Wow.
So then like just normal people who have started running, who maybe run 2 hours for a half.
2 hours from a half to a half.
Or
for a half, and going to a sub 3 in a marathon.
Yeah, within the year generally, yeah.
Okay, so I guess the question from there is, can anyone run a sub 3 hour marathon?
And not necessarily anyone, but a reasonably healthy person, and again, this is age contingent as well, can definitely run a sub 3 marathon. And you don't have to run 100 miles a week or do double days or threshold or anything like that. It's pretty straightforward, really.
Okay, so we'll dive into the methodology as we get in. Can you clarify what you mean by a reasonably healthy and fit person? So someone listening to this, they're thinking, all right, I've got a 2 hour half marathon. The idea of going sub 3 sounds alien.
Yeah.
But do I qualify in that? What does that look like?
Yeah, again, it depends. There are a lot of extrinsic factors that prevent that from happening, to do with work, family, sickness, injuries and things. But if somebody's played a bit of sport when they were a kid and then they've dropped out of sport maybe 10 years or so or 15, and they decide they take up the running bug and they do a park run, and they decide to do a half marathon. If they can run, I suppose from a starting point, like a 150 half or a 2 hour half, you can get them down under 3. Now that's not everybody,
Yeah.
but again, because it's about commitment to the project as well. But I would say any reasonably healthy. I mean, if you've got like a bloke who's 5 foot and he's 25 stone, then that's not happening unless they lose all the weight, and that's where you're the expert at getting people to do that. But I've had people. I mean, last year, because we're in the new year now. Sean Geraghty, his PB was 4:15 for the marathon, and in 10 months, I took him from 4:15 to 2:55.
Wow.
And I've done that with quite a few people, and he was just a normal bloke.
So from a high level perspective, what does it take? Like, let's use that as an example. What does it actually take to go from 4 to sub 3? Are there any markers? Is there any, you mentioned like live bit work, all that kind of stuff. I assume that's all fine because everyone's got work, right?
Yeah.
And injuries are fine.
Yeah.
What does it take?
The most important thing is, I suppose, in the old money, it used to be a 125 because you would double the half and add 10 for men, double the half and add 8 for women. But with the super shoes and the new fueling now, you can get away with probably like a 126 half or 126.30, something like that. Somebody's around there, then they're set for a sub 3 marathon. So that would be the key marker, really.
Okay, and that needs to be done. What? How is that a year before? Or?
No. You'd want to be having them running that as they go into the marathon box. So if somebody's running 125 or 126, automatic, then they're on for a sub 3. And when we talk about the methodology, I'll explain that.
Okay, so we're at the start of 2025. People might be thinking about races they're doing, marathons that they got coming up either this year or next year, and they've got a goal for a marathon. How do you go about setting a marathon goal, depending on where you are? Let's say everywhere from like the 5 hour plus marathoner,
Yeah,
and that might be listening to this, all the way down to like a 3:30 type person.
Yeah, I don't see. I'm not a big fan of this, like goal setting a year in advance, because you don't know what's going to happen to the person across the year. So I would break if we've got 12 months, if we're, let's say, a 4 hour marathon runner, they've run 4 hours in October, we're in January, they contact me. Generally speaking, they're going to be hip flexor dominant, so they're going to be using their hip flexors a lot for running as opposed to their glutes. So one of the key things to do is to get them faster, first of all, and get their glutes more involved and increase their hip extension. And the way I would do that is that I'd probably get them up to from 35 minutes 4 times a week to up to 65, a long run to 90. Then I'll put them on the thing that I call the pre-super base that we talk about. And then that's the key part for somebody who's like a 4 hour marathon runner, because it's taking them from shuffling like that ultra running style into running properly like when they were a kid again. And that takes 5 weeks. And then from there, I'd move them onto something that I call the super base. And then from the super base, I do a marathon bridge. And that can be anything from like 4 to 6 months, and then into the marathon training in itself. So that's how I would segment the year. And in terms of racing across that, I'd advise the people not to race in the pre-super base or the super base. At the end of the super base, get a half marathon as a marker, and then we can start working on goals, depending on how long we've got on the marathon bridge. Because if somebody does their half marathon, normally people will run a substantial PB after doing the super base. So if you've got your 4 hour guy, quite often a 4 hour guy will have a 2 hour half marathon because they can't pass that out really. They're just shuffling for longer. So if we got them down and say they ran 145 after the super base, so that would be equivalent of about a 3:36 marathon. So to get them a bit quicker over the marathon bridge part, which is the key part where they improve even more so. And then by the time they finish the marathon bridge and go into the marathon training, they'd need to be around 125, 126.
So I'm just going to pause you there before we go into, because people might not know what the super base, we'll go into that. Just to stay on this 4 or 5 hour person, what exactly is going on? I know you mentioned around hip flexor dominance. Can you just break it down in more layman's terms?
Yeah.
What does this mean? And in my head, that's the shuffler. I used to be a shuffler, and I'm probably still coming out of the other side of it. But the shuffling person who has the same 5K speed as their half marathon speed as their marathon speed.
A lot of it's not passed out enough. So
what's going on there? Like, why are people running the same speed for a 5K as they are for a marathon?
First of all, like the hip flexor dominant. And what I mean by that is they're using the hip flexors, the muscles that come down here in the front. So they're like puppet strings that hang down. So they're not particularly strong muscles. And that causes them to run like this, like a shuffle. Whereas what you're trying to do is get their glutes involved and increase the hip extension. And what that means is if you look at kids running around in a playground, the way they're running free rather than really rigid and stiff.
Yeah.
And that's one of the key things that we're trying to do with them.
Okay, so you're trying, and then I guess let's move into how do you now turn a shuffler into the kid in the playground?
Yeah.
Is it possible?
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it's something that I've been working on for quite a while now, trying to work out how to do that. But I've got the, so far the evidence that I've got in the last 6 months of it is eminently doable. So we put them onto something what we call the pre-super base. And before they can do that, they've got to be able to run their easy runs for 65 minutes and 90 minutes. That's just to give the musculoskeletal system the sort of integrity so it can cope with the training that's going to come.
Okay, just to pause you on that, maybe we need to go before the pre-super base.
Yeah.
What do people need to get onto before they think about, right, I need to start getting faster? What's like the base foundation for anyone who's interested in running a marathon or a half marathon? Where do they need to get their running up to in terms of days and time? If someone who wants to make a big jump, not just say the 2-3 times a week runner, but someone, where does that look like?
Well, ideally, you'd want, if you've got a 4-hour marathon runner, someone's topped out a 4-hour marathon, they're probably running 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah.
So ideally, you want them on 4 times a week, and they're probably running, I suppose, 35 minutes a day. They might have been doing a bit longer for the marathon training, but the way you would progress that is you take them from 35 minutes for each of their easy runs to 45, and then when you get to 45, you'd maybe make one of the runs the beginning of the long run. So the following week you might do 3 45s and a 55. The next week 3 55s and a 70. The next week 3 60s or 3 65s and an 80, and then the next week you get the long run down to 90. So at that point there, where they're running 3 times 65 minutes, all easy, and then a 90-minute easy run. Then at that point there, then they're ready to move on to the pre-super base.
Okay, so someone who wants to make substantial gains needs to be going at least 4 times a week.
Yeah, I'd say so. Yeah.
Okay, and can big jumps be made with, say, 3 times a week, or do you have to manage your expectations?
I would say ordinarily no. However, I've got people that have done that as well. So like I had a guy running in Boston, which doesn't really count because Boston's a downhill course and it's point to point, but he did it on a really hot day and it's a tough course to do it on, but he ran 2:52 and he only runs 2 or 3 times a week.
That's crazy.
That's a PB. And I've had a couple of people as well who are running 3 times a week, going from sort of like 350 to sub 3 within a year, but that's not the norm. You need to, I think you'd at least need to be running 4 times a week to give yourself a good shout at it. And then also bearing in mind, if somebody's running 4 times a week and breaking 3 hours for the marathon, you've got lots of space for them to develop, because then they can run 5 times, they can run 6 times, and each year that you're layering that, then there's more and more things that you can do with them.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so you got the runner up to 3 65s and a 90-minute. That's like before you do any of the methodology that we're about to explain, you need to get to that point.
Yeah, in fact, really, they shouldn't be doing any speed work till they get to there or of any kind, because they're more than likely going to get injured.
Okay, so when you see plans, I mean, this might be part of the myth busting part, but I just think it's pertinent to bring in now. When you see plans which have, say, the track interval sessions on the Tuesday, the tempo on the Thursday, the long run on the Saturday, and then some of these, why is that an issue, especially if you're a shuffler as well? Yeah,
because they're going to be shuffling at the same pace, and I've seen that a lot as well, and I've coached people who were like that. It's only kind of more recently where I've come up with this like not a formula, but a philosophy or concept of how to change their running style. But they're not going to get any faster. They'll just shuffle. Maybe they might shuffle a bit quicker, but it's not energy efficient really to do it, and more likely they're going to get injured, because if somebody's a shuffler and they're trying to run quick or long, what happens is it puts a lot of load on the gastrocnemius, which is the calf muscles, and the hip flexors as well, and then most of the time they're going to get injured.
Now, what are the most common things you'll see in that scenario?
The calf, or the MTJ, the muscle tendon junction, and the gastrocnemius, especially because these people will probably be over 35 years of age, and then you have all the things that go with aging as well. So it's really important to get the glutes more involved and get better hip extension.
Okay, so you've got the 365s and a 90. Can you just clarify what easy running means?
That's a good question. So for me, easy running means conversational. You should be able to talk the way that we're talking right now. If you're breathing a bit heavy, or or your legs are tiring, then it's about backing off. It's just keeping the conversation. That's the way I explain it to people. So, for example, if I've got somebody who's going to the Olympics, their easy pace, the fastest they run is 7:50, because you get diminishing returns by running faster. Now, a lot of people talk about you should do more steady training and things like that, but that's how people get injured as well, because I have this axiom: appropriate stress, recovery, adaptation. So if people are running too quick on their easy runs, and a lot of coaches do this because they don't understand the physiotherapy side of things or the physical therapy side of things and how recovery and adaptation works, they just work off the science. But it's a much more, I suppose, complex puzzle to solve, really.
So 750, just to confirm, everything you speak on today will be minute per miles?
Yeah, I can switch into kilometres. You might have to help me a bit. I grew up on kilometres and meters being on the track.
So it's about what, 5 minute Ks, just under 5 minute Ks, right?
Yeah, that would be 750 pace. Yeah, 455, something like that.
Okay, perfect. So easy
That's
running.
The fastest.
So easy running is conversational pace. It's not related to heart rate or zone 2 or zone 1 or whatever the things are there. I think it's just good. I know we're coming into the Mythbusters section, but this is the area I think it's probably on most people's minds. Like, I'm running easy. Should I buy the polar straps? Should I start looking at zone 1, zone 2? How much should I be obsessing over my Strava and my Garmin?
Yeah, forget all of that. I used to run with a Timex watch, and I would measure out my runs with a map and a piece of string. So you could argue that having all of these things could make things easier and a little bit more succinct. But again, a lot of the science is wrong on this, and I've mentioned this on my own podcast as well, because there's a recent paper about cancer research and Krebs cycle and things. So generally what happens is people believe that H ions are a byproduct of lactate. They're not. So, and they believe that that's what causes the burning. In a nutshell, it take me an hour to sit and explain it all and to change it into layman's terms. But the simple fact of the matter is all the stuff on zone 2 training is wrong, on threshold's wrong as well. That doesn't mean if people run in zone 2 and do threshold training, then they're not going to run well, because threshold, if we take it, what it means is basically the pace that you could hold for an hour. That's it in layman's terms. And that's a sweet spot to training. It's a really good area to training.
So when you hear threshold, you're thinking 1 hour pace. When you hear zone 2, you're thinking conversational pace. That's basically it.
I think zone 2 is a bit wider than that, because you can work at the top end of zone 2 and the bottom end of zone 2. But when people start saying that to me, I say, just forget that.
Yeah.
So just run easy conversational pace. It's about the workouts. So the workouts give you the appropriate stress, and then the easy running is where the recovery happens and where the sleep and nutrition come in, and that's where the adaptations kick in.
Okay, so we've established we're doing 365s and a 90 minute. We've got the foundation laid. The shuffler can now do that easy baseline. Anyone who's got a bit of sporting background can do that baseline. Now we move into the pre-super base, which is designed to improve hip extension, running form, running economy, etc. Can you just walk us through what does that look like in layman's, like what's happening here that's turning someone into a better runner?
Yeah, no, and this is a really important part for most of the people that are going to be watching this, I guess, if they're beginner runners especially. So if they're running 4 times a week, what we would have them doing is 2 runs of 65 minutes easy. Now, that 65 minutes easy is the maximum. Yeah. So they might decide that they're tired after a workout or they haven't recovered 100%, so they could run 45 minutes easy. So the 65 would be the maximum on 2 of the days. They would do a long run still of 90 minutes. And what we would do initially is we'd bring in a session of aerobic strides. And then in the second week, we would drop one of the easy runs and bring in hill blasts, and I'll explain what those are. So aerobic strides is a bit of a misnomer, because when we're running, we're using all the energy systems at the same time, but just to varying degrees. But the reason why we call them aerobic is because they're done in a relaxed way, and you've got a decent recovery, a jog back. So how that works, if I just speak on the aerobic strides first of all, we would start off with 3 sets of 5 times, probably with a beginner runner, 20 seconds. So they would run from a lamppost for 20 seconds, and they'll end up at a bench. And for the whole session, that's their 20 seconds. When they get to the bench, they turn around, they jog back. And they would do this at roughly 5K effort, roughly. And then after they finish the first set, they might jog for 3 minutes. Then they repeat the set again, but this time a smidge faster. And then they jog for 3 minutes. And then after that, they do the final set.
Okay.
And the way that progresses is, in the next week, you go from 20 seconds to 30 seconds, and then from 30 seconds to 40 seconds. So when they end up doing 3 sets of 5 times 40 seconds off a jog back recovery, when they finish that, they jog for 3 minutes, and then they would run 2 minutes, about 5K effort, and that progresses to 3 to 4 to 5. So that would be the workout structure on the pre-super base for the aerobic strides. But by the time they get to 3 sets of 5 times 40 seconds off a jog back recovery, and then the 4 or 5 minutes towards the end, it becomes more like a traditional workout. But the difference is because of what we're doing with the hill blasts, now they're running faster. And the hill blast in this session works synergistically as well.
And just to confirm, you just got aerobic strides. What are strides? You hear that come in a lot of workouts.
It depends on, again, the age of the person and what event they do. So for a middle distance runner, they're done pretty quickly before a session. But how I use them is more just about a turnover thing. So it would basically be, if I say 5 times 20 second strides at 5K effort, I know people are going to run it quicker than that. That's why I say 5K. But if I say that mile effort, they'd be sprinting them, and that's not what you want them to do. So generally, you'd probably say like the aerobic strides would be done at 5K effort and a little bit quicker, but they're not flat out.
And the goal is just to get the legs moving.
Yeah,
and that economy.
Yeah, because what will be happening with the hill blast is that's where the running economy improves, their running efficiency, their power, their hip extension, and that transfers across into the aerobic strides. So what they'll probably find is the pace that they did their original 3 sets of 5 times 20 seconds, when they get to the 3 sets of 5 times 40 seconds, plus the 4 or 5 minute add-on at the end, the 4 or 5 minute add-on will probably be faster than where they started with the 3 sets of 5 times 20 seconds.
Okay, so we've got the aerobic strides, we've got the 65 easy, and we've got the 90-minute long run easy, done easy. Where's all the magic coming from in the hill blast that does all this stuff with the running economy and the form and the power, etc.?
Yeah, there was a professor from Essex University, an Italian guy, did a big study into this and was saying that it's one of the best ways to improve running economy, running efficiency, getting a longer stride with more power so that you're not overstriding. And that's why I started bringing it in. Although I used to do these when I was younger, like I mentioned, but I realized pretty quickly you can't get a 45-year-old guy on a 15% climb and get them to sprint up it as fast as possible. So I devised a different way to do it, which was safer, because of course we've got all the aging stuff that starts happening at 35 as well. So the tendons end up with less collagen, so then they become more vulnerable to picking up injuries. There are things you can do about that, but you just got to be a little bit more nuanced in how you do the hill blast. So what we do is we do it on a hill that's shallower, so something like a flyover or a bridge over a motorway, roughly about 5%. And instead of going up at 100% trying to recruit fast twitch fibers, which most people, once they get into the sort of mid-30s and onwards, it's increasing the risk of them getting injured. So we do it on the shallower hill, and instead of scampering up it as fast as possible, if you imagine a 400-meter runner on the back straight, they're really graceful, elegant, powerful. So it's probably closer to like 98% effort. Now I know that's a bit vague, but the idea is not to sprint up it as fast as possible. And the best way to, I suppose, explain that is that I have this mantra that I tell everybody to sort of go through whenever they do the hill blast. And it's tall, relaxed, piston, pop, pop, pop. And I'll break that down. So if we look at the tall part, first of all, that's probably the most important part. So when a pro footballer or a basketball player or a rugby player, if they're doing hill sprints and they're training, they'll just scamper up the hill as fast as they can go. So what we do is we run perpendicular to the hill. So by running perpendicular to the hill, that almost exaggerates your stride slightly. So you'll get more hip extension, the knee drive will be better. The arms will be pumping back. So what happens with the stride is more back, but happens behind the hips. So the elbows come right the way back, and that's the piston part. So before, everything's coming through in straight lines. And it's important that they stay relaxed as well, because you don't want them tensing up. So that's where I come in with this idea of about 98% effort. So it just makes the person realize it's not flat out. But by doing this thing with the tall, relaxed, and the piston, it exaggerates everything. So it becomes more like a stride, sprint, drill sort of thing as well. And then if we add in the pop, 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 that's like your hot coals. So you want your feet popping off the ground as quickly as possible. So tall, nice and relaxed, everything coming through in straight lines, feet popping off the ground. So what that does, like I said, it exaggerates the stride slightly, but it starts to encourage the heel to come up underneath the butt, which gives better hip extension. And you actually get the sensation, if you get it right, it's almost like you're riding a bicycle up a hill. You feel like you're running fast, but it doesn't feel quite right in terms of like sprinting as fast as you can. And then we take a 2-minute 30 recovery, which is a walk. The reason for that is because the energy system that we're predominantly using is creatine phosphate. You have 8 to 12 seconds of creatine in your body, but I find that 8's the sweet spot. So we walk for 2 minutes 30, fully recover, and then we go again.
Okay. And when you talk about running economy and running efficiency, what does that mean?
probably the best way to describe it in layman's terms is that the stride's going to get bigger and more powerful, and you're using your glutes more than, like we spoke about earlier, the hip flexors. So what will happen is that if somebody runs at 6 minutes per kilometre before they do the hill blast, and then if they run at 5 minutes per kilometre after doing the hill blast, it'll just feel exactly the same. But what's happened is, over time, because the brain works autonomously and gets you up the hill in the most efficient and effective way, it kind of drills in everything. So the central nervous system's working in a different way as well. And I suppose it's rewiring somebody, really. That's probably the best way to describe it. But it just means that they're going to be running faster and more economical.
Okay, and you said so 8 seconds. How many sets are you doing?
Just one set. So what you would do is you would start somebody off with 4 of them, because it's something new. So whenever you do the biggest risk of injury is whenever you introduce something new, different running surface, speed work, mileage, or anything like that. So it all has to go in a progressive, structured way. So you would start somebody off on 4 reps, and you get them to video themselves as well, because practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So if people are doing them wrong, you need to correct it, maybe with some different types of drills and things. So if you check that they're doing it right, once they're doing it right, then depending on the injury history and the age and things, then you would have them go in from 4 to 6 to 8, or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's where the bit of the art and managing it comes in. But generally, you wouldn't do any more than 8, because what you'll notice when you do these is, by the time you get to the 7th or the 8th one, the central nervous system is a little bit fatigued. So by going beyond that, you're getting diminishing returns. You're increasing the risk of getting injured.
Yeah, I found that when I was doing the hill blast, the neural fatigue was quite high. Like I felt by 6, 7 reps, I was quite mentally tired from the idea of the form, not only the form, but also just the explosiveness of it.
Yeah.
So it's probably the right time to call it then.
Yeah, no, I think, and again, the body adapts to it. So if you do 4 in week 1, 5, then 6, then 7, then 8, the body's adapting to that and becoming more efficient at doing it as well.
Yeah.
And quite often what happens with people is when they do the cool down, and I say, just have a quick look at your watch, and they don't realise they're running as fast as they are, because it almost works immediately, especially when you've done it a couple of weeks and it's kicking in. So you have to hold yourself back on the cool down as well.
I felt on some of the days doing hill blasts, a couple hours later, my glutes and hamstrings were just fired up.
That's
they're
what you
really
want.
engaged.
That's it, exactly. And the first time people do this, they should find that they've got a little bit of DOMs in their glutes and maybe a little bit in the hamstrings. Not everybody, but again, once you've been doing it a while, it's a really easy session. It's not a hard session, it's a technical session. But for me, it's the best bang for buck session that you can give to anybody.
It's like weights for runners, right?
Yeah. Well, that's what it is. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
And why? What? I know you mentioned around like the creatine phosphate system is why it's 8 seconds long, and we want to focus on power. So, but why do you see people talk about long hill reps? You know, where you think of hills normally for runners, and you're just thinking 30 seconds to a minute, just straining your way all the way up, basically dying until the end. I mean, that's what I've done in the past. I'll be getting to the top of the hill, and I'm just like.
Yeah, well, what you'll find is, say, that the target audience here, the people that will be watching and listening to this, is, if they're a little bit older and they're coming into running new, they wouldn't be able to run up these hills properly. Those type of hills that you're talking about are designed for middle distance runners.
Oh, wow, okay.
Who are younger. So I used to do those. In the winter, I'd do like 10 times 30 seconds, 10 times 45 seconds off a jog recovery, 10 times 1 minute off a jog recovery, 8 times 90 seconds, 6 times 2 minutes, and how you would use those, you would use them in the winter time in preparation for the track, so they're getting you strong enough so that you can hit the track and run faster.
The biggest thing I've taken away from the coaching course that we're on at the moment is how so much of the mainstream running education is based on 20-year-old middle distance runners.
Exactly, yeah. So the typical sort of structure of a week in the UK and Ireland and America is they might do like a track session on a tempo or a track session on a Tuesday, a Thursday a tempo or a track session, a race on a Saturday, and a long slow run on a Sunday. And that's how I used to train years and years ago. But it's not the most effective way, and it's not the smartest way, and it doesn't bring the biggest improvements. And that kind of feeds into the stuff, the type of track session that people are doing as well for marathon training. You see loads of people doing like VO2 max type sessions, like 6 times 800 off a 2 minute 30 jog recovery. It's pointless. It's got no relationship to the marathon whatsoever.
Yeah. Are they better off suited to middle distance runners?
Yeah. Sort of 800, 1500, 5K, occasionally for a 10K runner. Like if I've got somebody who's training for a marathon and in the summertime they might decide to do a 5K session, I wouldn't give them that type of session. I'd give them 20 times 1 minute on and off. So 1 minute on would be a 5K effort, and off the 1 minute would be a jog, which would be similar to doing 20 times 300 off a 100-meter jog. And the reason for that is when you're running at those sort of paces at 800, 1500, 3000 pace, there's a lot of force going through the musculoskeletal system, and as people get older, that's where the increased risk is. So this is where you get the cycle of mediocrity, where you might have a club runner who's, you know, in their say 35 or 40, they go down to the club session, which is not specifically designed for them, it's just a group session, and they'll do, I don't know, something like 10 600s or 6 800s, and they might improve like quick. You can improve quite quickly with this over a couple of weeks, but then what happens is they get injured, because their body's not able to cope with the musculoskeletal system's not able to cope with the force and the power of doing these types of sessions. So by just running at this pace for 1 minute, it's safe, and you're getting that turnover that you're after as well, and you're getting the cardiovascular workout part of it as well, but it's much safer.
Just before we started working together, I think on our first like onboarding process, you said, you were saying, what have you done this week? And I said, I think I did like a 22K interval session on the weekend, and then I did 14 400s on the Wednesday. And I remember just feeling absolutely fried from those sessions, thinking, if this is what marathon training is, I'm not going to survive.
Yeah, and I think you had a little dose of medial tibial stress syndrome, shin splints, and some Achilles issues, and then breaking down and getting sick. And that's why, because that sort of stuff there is not understanding how the body operates from a appropriate stress recovery and adaptation, or not understanding the overload principle as well.
Okay, so let's move on to, you've done the pre-super base for 4 to 8 weeks, or 6 to 8 weeks. Moving into the super base, which you call the best kept secret in the running world.
Absolutely. 100%.
Tell us the overview of this. Now, if you want to deep dive into this, I'd recommend listening to
July.
There's an episode
22.
in July 2022 on your podcast, The Stablemaster Speaks.
Yeah.
It's called Marathon Part 2 or something. We'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah.
It's one of the best episodes on the marathon you can listen to. But from a high level perspective, what is a super base?
Yeah.
How long is it? What's included? Why is it so good?
Yeah.
For a marathon runner.
Yeah. Okay. So if we dial it back to when the guy who's a 4-hour marathon runner, the first thing, we've got the musculoskeletal system into a position that it can move on to the pre-super base. Now we've rewired the body and we've got them running like a kid, and they're running faster and more economical.
Sorry, can I just pause you there? Yeah. We're talking about the sub 4-hour marathon, but my goal is sub 3. But you've also put me on this pre-super base. Why is that?
Yeah, because your starting point would have been roughly around a 3:45 or 3:50.
Yeah, perfect. Just want to clarify that. Yeah.
And also because I saw your running form, because you were running
describe that. Yeah.
But the first one was you were a complete shuffler, and then you kind of tried to improve your running form, and you were like the Terminator or Forrest Gump, so or pissed like a cyborg. So when we fixed that and just said, look, just relax and run, and and then at that point then you were kind of ready to move on to the pre-super base. And you said to me that you believed that you were on the twitch fiber spectrum on the slow side, but I just knew that wasn't right because of the size of you and the weightlifting that you'd done. So when we did the hill blast, you were like the Terminator on cocaine gun doing the hill blasts as well. So, but they've worked immediately. Look how much you've improved already.
Yeah.
So,
okay, now let's go into this.
That gets the person more efficient. Now they're ready to do workouts.
Okay, go. Let's go into that then.
Okay, so I devised the super base during the COVID time because it was fantastic, because I knew people weren't going to be able to race, and from a coaching point of view, that's exactly what you want.
Why is that?
Because people over race and they get injured and they get burnt out and they plateau.
What's that analogy you have of racing? I think it's a good one for people to listen to.
Yeah, so training's putting money in the bank, racing is spending money, but you can spend money prudently. So when you race, you should race for purpose. So it's like buying a car. If you need to buy a car to get to a job, that's an investment, but it's spending money. So what you need to do is program your racing through the year, and there should be a reason for every single run you do. There should be a reason for every single race you do. That's if you want to get the best out of yourself. Now, some people just like racing, but they're not going to improve very much if they race all the time.
Yeah, it's like in bodybuilding where you see people competing on stage every 6 to 12 months. They never have that off-season period where they can actually build some muscle. So they turn up every year looking exactly the same. And it's usually because of social media or whatever, their addiction to dieting and getting on stages. But it's the same thing. It's like the off-season is thought of as, we think of it as like the investment phase where you're depositing the chips.
Yeah.
Dieting should just be to empty the cash and draw the rewards. But
really you need every 3 years. It's different for running, obviously, but
Yeah, yeah.
every 3 years is what you're thinking about for real, genuine improvements. But we see people doing it. They want to do a diet every 6 months, and
Yeah.
it's like, why? You look exactly the same.
Yeah, and that's like the people that do 2 or 3 marathons a year, they don't improve.
Yeah.
If they improve, it's by 10 seconds or a minute or 2 minutes. Whereas, again, probably go into this more detail later, but if you pick one marathon a year and you can improve your 5K time, your 10K time, 10-mile half marathon on that journey towards the marathon itself, and that's where you make the big chunks, and that's what happens with the people in the stable, the people that I coach. The examples I've given you is because they're not racing 2 or 3 marathons a year. They work on improving their half marathon time, which is the most important thing once you get running, and that's where the super base comes in, really. So the idea when I designed it was I wanted people to be able to the musculoskeletal system to develop to the point where it could cope with what I call marathon bridge training and then marathon training, and also make sure they're still also improving their aerobic capacity and doing it safely as well.
Yeah.
So the way it works is we do a midweek session and a long run on the weekend. The long run on the weekend is called the endurance spine. And just in a nutshell, what it is 40. So we work out what sort of pace somebody could hold for an hour roughly. This has got nothing to do with Daniel's VDOT or anything like that. So I just say to somebody, what sort of effort or pace do you think you could hold for a 1 hour race? The easiest way to explain this, let's say 6-minute miling, okay?
Yeah.
So what we do, we start them off with a 20-minute warm-up, a 20-minute tempo, a 20-minute cool-down. That initial 20-minute tempo is that 6-minute mile pace, the pace they could hold for an hour. And what they should find is that when they finish the 20-minute tempo, is that they can keep going for, say, 35 or 40 minutes. That's how they should feel. Then on the weekend, in what I call the endurance spine run, is we do a 30-minute easy, a 40-minute tempo, a 30-minute easy. But that 40-minute tempo is 20 seconds per mile slower than the original 20-minute tempo. And then as we go through the super base that takes about 4 months, when they finish, their 60-minute tempo on the weekend is as fast as, if not faster than their original 20-minute tempo.
Wow, okay.
And that's down to what we do in the midweek, because we go, just to give a quick example of the endurance spine, they would do 40 minutes at 6:20 pace, 50 at 6:20, 60 at 6:20. So they're seeing progression every single week. And then when they get to 60, you dial them back to 40, and then you increase the pace by 5 seconds. So now they're doing 40, 50, 60 at 6:15, 40, 50, 60, 6:10, and that's how it rolls around. And that keeps them focused and motivated because they see progress every single week. But the reason they can do that is because of what they do in the midweek. So that 20-minute tempo, we build it up from 20 at 6, and then 5 minutes easy, 10 at 6, 15 at 6, 20 at 6. And then when we get to 2 times 20 at 6, we start to break the second 20-minute tempo down and start to run a bit faster. Where that ends up is at 8 times 5 minutes at probably 5:50 pace off a 3-minute jog recovery. And then that's that saying there, the world famous saying, when you do 8 times 5 minutes, you're on the precipice of the V-shaped valley of death. And what that basically means is now the musculoskeletal is strong enough to go quite a bit quicker.
Yeah.
So we just come down and get quicker. So we keep the volume at 40 minutes for the session, like 8 times 5, 10 times 4. Then we cut it down to 10 times 3. So we take 10 minutes off the volume, shorten the rep down to 3 minutes because we're going to be going a bit quicker. So eventually where you end up is 20 times 1 minute on and off, which is generally about 5K pace. Then we come back up again. But as we come back up, the person won't be slowing down by 5 seconds per mile the way they've sped up by 5 seconds per mile coming down and in, because the endurance spine session is working on the weekend run, and that's holding everything together. So ultimately, generally what happens is they'll finish the 60-minute tempo in 6 minutes, which is probably going to be a 10-mile PB for them anyway, or thereabouts. Yeah. But they'll also be a bit quicker because as we come down in the V-shaped valley of death, the people generally will outrun me. So if I say run 10 times 4 at, I don't know, say 5:40 pace, you'll probably find they might run them at 5:35. So I catch them up and I allow people to outrun me in the midweek session, but not on the weekend session. And the reason for not allowing them to outrun me on the weekend session is that's where the injury risk would be. So if they're going faster and faster and faster, they're going to end up racing the weekend session, and you don't want that, because that weekend session is the cement that mortises the interstices. And what I mean by that is it holds everything together.
Yeah. So you're starting off, because you're starting off slow on the weekend session, you're able to do that 40, 50, 60 come down. And the idea is really, it's not about racing the weekend, it's about stimulating the musculoskeletal system. So you're coaxing it into and strength.
And it's also helping the endurance as well.
Because you've got 30 at the beginning and the end, so
that's it.
the runs are quite long.
Yeah, well, if you look at yourself today on the Moyburn Road there, I mean, how much have you improved? And you ran at altitude today on the Moyburn Road, and bear in mind that on the way back as well, it was kind of uphillish as well.
Yeah.
You ran that faster than what you've been running at sea level a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then, but you did say, you know, in that 30-minute cool down, you felt the muscular fatigue from the session and the distance as well. But that's, again, you were able to cope with that. It's just probably you ran it a little bit quick today.
Yeah.
So, you know, if we were to do that session next week, I'd probably say to you, instead of progressing it, dial it back a little bit so you're a little bit more comfortable in those final 10 minutes, because you were running away, chatting away, you know, for the first 40 minutes of it. But then in that final 10 minutes, I looked out the window of the Matatu and I thought, he's smiling away, he's having a great one. And I looked closer and I could see it was a grimace. Those beautiful white teeth of yours were glowing in the morning sunlight.
Yeah, it quickly changed, didn't it? It went from I was thinking I could do this for another 80 minutes.
Yeah.
And then it suddenly just hit me around the 50-minute mark.
Is that when the top come off?
No, that was happening at 30 minutes.
Okay.
Around 50 minutes, my legs just started feeling really heavy. It felt like I'd done 20 rep leg press and then into a run.
Yeah, you see, you probably misjudged the course a bit, because going out, you don't notice so much that you're going downhill a little bit, because there are a few bumps as you go down as well. But then when you turn around and come back up the Moyburn Road, there are bumps on there, but you're actually gradually climbing all of the way up as well. And it probably felt right. By feel, it felt right for the first like 40 minutes or so. But then as you come back, you were putting in more effort to try and hold the pace. And really, what you should have done is just allowed yourself to slow down a bit and just kept that effort the same.
Yeah. Now, just on that, before we move, go on the super pace, can you talk about running by feel and running by effort? Because this is something I've really struggled with so far. I'm the guy who's programming his watch.
Yeah.
You know, chasing down the paces. If I'm behind, even though I know it's a hard day, I'll still try and hit the paces. But only now I think I'm still getting there, but I'm starting to learn.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, cool. I need to actually make the shift now, where if the paces aren't feeling, if they're not there that day, to not force the pace and end up, you know, keeled over, about to vomit. Just in a situation where I should have just literally just pulled back by 5-10 seconds a kilometer or mile.
Yeah. Well, what you'll find is that most elite runners run by feel. They're really in tune and dialed into their body. They don't do zone 2 stuff, things like that. Okay, you might get some people doing threshold stuff, but you've been in it here in Kenya. You've seen no threshold stuff, no heart rate straps, very few GPS watches. These guys can run at the exact pace. They're tuned into it. And if you look back in before GPS watches came in, when the era, say Seb Coe, Steve Cram, Ovid, and when I was running, we had Casio watches. So we didn't have a clue what pace we were running. We were able to run by feel to do sessions, unless we were on a track session, because then you can measure time against distance accurately. So the idea is, like, an easy run feels easy. So, and then if you say to somebody, like we said there about the 20-minute tempo, the pace that you believe you could hold for an hour. Now, normally you can work out this. So most people will have ran a race. So if somebody's ran a half marathon and it was at, let's say, 6:20 pace, it means that their 10-mile pace is probably going to be around about 6:13. So it's generally about 7 seconds per mile, the difference between the 10-mile and a half marathon. And off that, you can start to get an idea. So what you should notice when I dish out the training, I'll say, do on the super base, it might be something like 2 times 20 minutes at 6-minute pace-ish.
Yeah.
And that gives that little bit of leeway there. But where you should go really is more on the conservative side than the aggressive side, because the idea is to get you to run fast and controlled, and that's why the recoveries are quite generous as well on the super base. Whereas when we come out of the super base, we mix up sessions quite a bit, so different varied paces, because the runner's more experienced and more dialed into their body as well, and the muscular skeletal system's ready for it too.
One thing I was sharing with you yesterday was the bodybuilding world I come from, and the methodology I really like is the high intensity, low volume approach, where you do 1 or 2 sets, but the idea is to see God by the end of the set. And I think that's where I've tried to bring this into running. When I first started running, every run was done, you know, all out. I think that's why I've struggled with the running by feel, when it's actually the old school bodybuilding approach of higher volume, keep a few in the tank, live to fight another day. Actually works better in running. Whereas I personally think in bodybuilding the other way works nicely. But in running, I think it's completely the opposite. I think you have to almost stimulate rather than annihilate.
I like that.
The famous Lee Haney one.
Lee Haney, I'm pinching that.
Do you remember him?
No, I don't
Yeah,
remember.
he won the Mr. Olympia. I think it was 8 times, might be 7, but I think it was 8 times.
Yeah. Oh, you
But
were telling me this yesterday. I remember now. Yeah,
his
yeah,
big ethos was stimulate, don't annihilate.
yeah, yeah,
But he had a great longevity. So
yeah. And
whereas
again,
most of the high intensity guys, they're beaten up and all over the place.
and
Yeah.
that's when you bring that analogy across into running as well. It's the same thing. The people that are racing a lot get the longevities out the window. Most of the time, you do get some outliers as
Yeah.
well. In middle distance running, you can race a lot more, but in the longer stuff, half marathons, 10K half marathon, and marathon, you can't race as much because you end up getting injured because your body's got to have time to recover and adapt. And again, as I say to people, this is a cliche with coaches. When you finish a session, you should feel like you could do 1 or 2 more reps.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you're doing that, then what you're doing is you're not forcing the fitness. You're allowing the fitness to come to you, and that's the key thing. And what you were doing initially was because you're an alpha male, and also because you're very goal driven. Like your mindset was that if I push harder, I'm going to do better. And invariably, what happens is you get injured, or you get sick, or your body breaks down, or you burn out. So with running, it's not like other sports where the harder you push or the more you do, the better you get at it. It's got to be done in a very, very controlled way, and you just got to allow the body to adapt, and it just comes and comes and comes.
Got it. Okay, super base. So
Yeah.
is there anything else on the super base, or we covered that from a high level perspective?
From a high level
starting at
perspective,
the 20-minute tempo, starting at the 40, 50, 60 on the weekend, and just building them both up until you get to that goal of turning your 20-minute tempo into your 60-minute tempo on the weekend. And by tempo, it means you could probably hold it for another 30 minutes or so.
Yeah,
so it should lead to a half marathon PB.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what I advise people to do is, and again, this was a coincidence. I didn't design it this way. Was to do a half marathon after the super base, because what I found is everybody's in half marathon shape when they finish it, and quite often it would be a substantial half marathon as well. So I get that done, and that gives you your true marker.
Yeah.
You see as well. You could say, okay, if this person's just banged out this for a half marathon, you could start working out what their 10K time should be, what their marathon time should be as well. But just flipping back into the super base, just one quick thing, because it's important. When the person goes down the precipice of the V-shaped valley of death, if they're doing 8 times 5 minutes at, say, 6-minute mile pace, and then they do 10 times 4 at 6-minute mile pace, and then 10 times 3 at 6-minute mile pace, what the coach needs to do here is drop in what we call a yo-yo. And this is giving some really good example of what we were talking about earlier. So somebody might not have done the pre-super base. They might just come straight in onto the super base. Maybe they're at 3:30, 3:20, but you wouldn't necessarily put them on the pre-super base. But what this tells you is that the person is pretty much, in terms of the fast, slow twitch fiber spectrum, they're more on the slow twitch fiber end of the spectrum. And if you haven't given them hill blast, that's the perfect yo-yo to drop in here. And what you'll find is they'll just shoot forward. So I just want to bring that in, because some people might think to yourself, well, I got stuck at 10 times 4, 10 times 3. And conversely, it's at that point there that people trying to shoot ahead of you might run 10 seconds per mile faster than what you've asked them to.
Yeah.
And that means everything's gelling together really nicely. And there's a warning sign there as well. You've got to hold them back on the weekend, because when they start going quicker here, they'll start wanting to go quicker on the weekend. And when people are improving like that, that's a dangerous time. You've got to hold them back, because intuitively they want to go faster.
Yeah. Okay. So we finished the super base.
Yeah.
Where are we going to next?
Marathon bridge. Let's say you've got 3 months before the marathon training, and this is where the real art comes in now, because it's very, very specific to the individual. And the super base can be specific to the individual as well, because that's just a high level outline.
Yeah.
So for quite a few people, I might tweak that and change it. So you're in the marathon bridge part. This is now the part where you vary the paces in sessions. So for example, you might give somebody 10, 8, 6, 4, 2. So that 10 minute would be at half marathon, the 8 at 10 mile, the 6 at 10K, the 4 at 5 mile, and the 2 minutes at 5K. So, but they're aware of how these paces feel now. They're getting in tune with their body and running by feel. And with a cut down session like that, say off 2 minutes, that's nothing like anything in the super base. So, or you might give them 5 times 5 minutes off 2 minutes, the 5 minutes at a 5 mile effort, or you could do you could do a session of like 12 times 3 minutes off 35 seconds, the 3 minutes being at 10 mile effort. Yeah. And then you progress that to 15 times 3 minutes at 10 mile effort off 35 seconds. So this is a bit where you look at the athlete, and what I would do here is I would look in microcycles of blocks of 2 weeks. So in week 1, I might give a longer rep session, something like 8 times 5 minutes at 10 mile effort off 75 seconds. in week 2, I'd give them something a bit shorter. So depending on the athlete, it could be something like 10 times 2 minutes, off 2 minutes, plus 10 times 1 minute, off 1 minute. Now that would be a session that I would give more to somebody who's a 2:30 marathon runner. But if somebody's a bit slower, I might just give them 12 times 2 minutes at 5k, 5 mile effort or something around there. So one week it would be a bit shorter, the next week a bit longer. And then you'll find, because of the overload principle, what you do today is affected in 10 days time. So when you get to week 3, you'll see improvement, and it just keeps marching forward like that. You'll see their 40, 50, 60s getting quicker as well.
So in the midweek, you're flipping in 2-week microcycles between faster workouts and slower workouts, but working in reps, right?
Yeah.
On the weekend, you're continuing the 40, 50, 60. So what's to stop someone on the 40, 50, 60 ending up, as you say, like Kipchoge?
Yeah, so they're not
banging out
so
4-minute miles.
Two things are going to happen. They're either going to beat Kipchoge or faster than Kipchoge, or they're going to get injured. So what I do here is, again, because it's at this point, as they're improving, they're going to be pushing more. So where I would go with this is with what I call the endurance spine run and a structural run. So week 1, they might do 30 minutes easy, 40 minutes at 6-minute mile pace, 30 minutes easy. Week 2, 20 minutes easy, 80 minutes at 20 to 30 seconds slower than half marathon pace, 20-minute cool down. And then week 3, back to the 50.
Okay.
And then a 90-minute tempo at 20 or 30 seconds slower than half marathon pace, and then to the 60. So you're now working over 5 weeks rather than 3 weeks. And then maybe even give them a 2-hour easy run as well, and a step back week. So you've got 6 weeks there. And what this does is it gives the musculoskeletal system and the aerobic system time to catch the speed, the faster stuff that you're doing in the week, to influence the weekend session and keep the risk of injury lower as well.
Okay, so this period lasts anywhere from the end of the super base all the way till 12 weeks out from the marathon. Is that right?
Roughly. Again, it depends on the athlete. So you might do an 8-week block for the marathon, a 10-week, 12 or 14, if they've got holidays, or if you're factoring in step backs, and also allowing time for maybe somebody to get a cold for a week as well. But I would say kind of 13 weeks before the marathon is the sweet spot, because what they would do is they would race a half marathon 13 weeks before the marathon itself. From that dictates what marathon pace is going to be.
So that's the big one.
That's the big one, yeah. So now that half marathon race, that has to be all things being equal. So if you get a day when the temperature is 22 and the dew point is 22, all bets are off. So you have to look more at the
just so people know, what does that mean?
Yeah.
When the temperature and the dew point, what is it?
Okay.
The first time I heard it, I had no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah. Okay. So if it's 22 degrees, and the dew point say 8, okay, what's going to happen is it's just going to feel warm, but your body's going to cope with it. But if the dew point is similar to the temperature, what happens is, as your body heats up from the sun, at 22, 23 degrees or whatever, if the dew point's the same, the body can't clear the sweat off the body. Yeah. And then because of the air, the atmosphere, or the air, and what happens then is the body overheats. And this normally happens around about the 10k mark. So this is why I'm reluctant to give people half marathons in the summertime, because whilst the UK and Ireland and some other parts of Europe might not be particularly hot in the summer, you do get days where it could be 25 degrees and the dew point could be 24. And a good way to tell that is the air will just have that kind of heavy feel to it. It'll feel warm and muggy. That's the day that when it's like that, you know you're in for a tough day. But you can get away with up to about 10k in a race. After that, you're going to be struggling.
So all things being equal, the big half marathon is 12 weeks out from the marathon.
Yeah.
So for myself, trying to break going sub 3, is that the 125, 126 thing you mentioned?
That's where you would need to be, yeah.
Okay, and does that ever, let's say I end up doing 128, worst case scenario, does that mean sub 3 is off, or does that mean you can still get quicker? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so in a perfect world, you'll run a 125, 126 or even faster. But if you're running 128, what that's saying to me is I have to deal with the marathon block in a different way to the principle or the outline.
Okay.
And the reason for that is that if you're running 128, so if you double that, that's 256, and that means which you're probably not going to be able to do.
Yeah.
Some people can do this. Some people you can double the half marathon and add 4. A good example was Aoife Cook, whom I coach. Double the half marathon time and add 4 and 5. And that's where you're at. But generally, you need that bit of a cushion. Cool. So if you go, when I do the marathon training, the more important session is the weekend session now, and not so much the weekend midweek. So the midweek session supports the long run on the weekend.
Okay.
Because we progress that in a structured way, working our way up to 18 miles at marathon pace, 2 miles up, 18 miles at marathon pace, and 2 down. But we don't dive straight into that. We work on a weekly basis getting there. And what you give to the person in the midweek enables them to do that.
Just to stop you there, because just to stay on the half marathon, before we go into the marathon prep, why is that one the most important versus the typical 4-week tune-up? There's usually the half marathon is 4 weeks before. Why is that so?
Yeah, because that comes from the old
Just debunk
school.
that, because I initially had Manchester Marathon booked, and I had a half 4 weeks out, and then we decided to scrap all of it because if I wanted to actually get a good time, I need more time. But I always thought you needed something 4 weeks before. Why is that wrong?
Yeah, that's from 30 years ago when I was running. That's what people used to do, because they thought it would just sharpen you up and tell you where you are in terms of your preparation. But taking in mind, if you're going to race a half marathon 4 weeks before, you should, given the overload principle, you need to taper 10 days before that, and you're going to need a week to recover. So that half marathon is going to cost you 5 workouts 4 weeks before. And if you run a really good half marathon 4 weeks before a marathon, it means you're not in good marathon shape, you're in good half marathon shape. So if you were to run a half marathon 4 weeks before, what should happen is you probably should be a little bit disappointed with it. That's a better sign. It means you're more in marathon shape than half marathon. So just remember as well, the half marathon, whilst it's a good idea to give you a benchmark of fitness, the half marathon is not the marathon. It's a completely different beast. Because in the marathon, what you're doing is teaching your body, or training your body to burn glycogen efficiently at marathon pace, not a half marathon pace. And some people do a 5K race the week before thinking to sharpen up. You don't want to sharpen up. You want your body just as I've said previously, it should be like a Volvo purring up the motorway, just burning glycogen really, really efficiently.
As opposed to?
As opposed to, well, I call you the boy racer. So burning up around the streets, tooting your horn and everything, taking your top off and going out the window and things like that. So, but no, I understand why people think that. So if you look at Eilish McColgan, she ran the Berlin half marathon, I don't know if it was last year or the year before. I think it was the year before, because Kate Drew, who runs for England, whom I coached, because she's been out for a long time now with a high hamstring issue. So Kate ran 73 minutes there, which was a really good PB, and I can't remember what time Eilish ran, but it was a really good half marathon time, and that was 3 or 4 weeks before London, and then she was out for London. Now I don't know the exact story. It could be. I think it was an injury. She seemed to be complaining of injury, if I remember correctly, afterwards. But then I understand as well there were some issues to do with fueling that she was struggling with. But it'd be interesting to see with this build up to London if she does the same thing. She shouldn't. In my book, she shouldn't do it. She shouldn't be racing at all in the marathon build up. And if she does that, I think, and she's got her fueling right, I think she'll run a really, really good marathon.
Okay. Now let's assume. Well, let's not assume. I've hit the sub 125 in August.
Yeah.
What does the marathon prep in an ideal world look like from then until Valencia in December? What happens to get yourself from half marathon shape into marathon shape?
Yeah, and we discussed this on the course. There's a few different options you've got here, but ultimately what you're trying to do is...
We'll just go with the overview.
Yeah. So ultimately what you're trying to do is 4 weeks away from the marathon, you would do a 2 mile easy, 18 miles at marathon pace, and a 2 mile cool down. So if we start 12 weeks before that, you've got, 8 weeks before that, the way I would generally go with it as an outline would be something like 2 mile warm up, 12 miles at 20 seconds slower than marathon pace, 2 mile cool down. Now that should feel really easy if the weekend before you've run 13 miles at half marathon pace,
Yeah, makes sense.
And then you progress that in the following week to 2 up, 14 at 15 seconds slower than marathon pace, and 2 down. And then that goes to 16, 2 up at 10 seconds slower than the marathon pace. So 2 up, 16 at 10 seconds slower than marathon pace, and 2 down. So all of those runs are pretty easy to do because you've ran 13 miles at 20 seconds faster than marathon pace.
Yeah.
So even 16 at 10 seconds. But what you're doing is you're developing the musculoskeletal system in a progressive structured way, preparing it for the distance that's coming. Once you get to that point, it just depends how the athlete's feeling, where you go with it, whether you start putting in some marathon pace, a bit of marathon pace, or you dial back and do something like 14 miles at marathon pace, 16 at marathon pace, 18, or you might, in that 16 mile tempo, you might say do something like, okay, we're going to do 10 miles at 10 seconds slower than marathon pace and 6 miles at marathon pace. And then the next week, 8 miles at 10 seconds slower than marathon pace and 8 miles at marathon pace. And then the following week, and you just build it in, and that's where you structure it in. So that's two of the ways that you could approach it. Or you could alternate between marathon pace and the structural run. So on week 1, you might do, because you've done your half marathon, which is 13 miles at 20 seconds faster than marathon pace, you might come in and do 14 miles at 20 seconds slower, and then do a marathon pace run. Then next week do 14 miles at marathon pace, then do 16 at a bit slower than marathon pace, and then 16 at marathon pace. And
Got
then
it.
you could, there's different ways you can do it, and it depends on the athlete and how the trainer's going. That would be the kind of outline for the weekend session. But the midweek session, again, is the idea is it supports the marathon pace run. So generally you want to be working around half marathon pace, 10-mile half marathon pace, because they're not too stressful and they're manageable, but they're a good bit faster than marathon pace. So that starts to make that marathon pace feel easier. And to pinch Canova's saying about the funnel, that working either side of marathon pace and bringing it together, so that when you hit the 2 miles, now Canova doesn't coach like this, but he talks about the funnel. It's just, I've adapted this from years ago from speaking to him and actually here having dinner with him, and worked out a different system that's more suitable for people who aren't running 2.5 and 2.4 for a marathon. It's more suitable for people running like 2.25 and slower.
So the funnel is, in the midweek you're working faster than marathon pace.
Yeah.
On the weekends you're working slightly slower. Yeah. And over the course of 12 weeks, so you bring it all nicely together.
8 weeks.
So 8 weeks, you bring it over 8 weeks, you bring it nicely together, and then once you're 8 weeks out, you got the big workout. Sorry, 4 weeks out, you got the big workout of 2 up, 18 miles at marathon pace, 2 down.
Correct.
That's the goal, and then you taper into race.
Well,
and just a couple of things on there. The long run is designed to burn glycogen at
efficiently at marathon pace. Yeah,
is to build the body up from a
Structurally.
structural perspective, so you can actually handle the mileage, and then obviously it's
confidence
to
as well.
build the confidence and aerobic capacity and all the other bits part of the marathon.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, why are we aiming for that 18 miles at marathon pace versus, say, I don't know, 20 miles easy? Why can't that long run just be an easy run? Because I think most plans I used to see before I came to you were just, weekend, you just start at, I don't know, 10 miles, and over the course of 12 weeks you go from 10 miles to 20 miles, and then you should have the rest.
Yeah, so
you let the crowd take you to the last through the last 6.
What you're doing there, you're testing my turkey teeth to see if I can say the word specificity. Got it. Yeah, it's about, you've got it. If you're running 20 miles easy, that's got nothing to do with running 26 miles at marathon pace. It's that simple.
Yeah.
So I've seen people doing 4 times 5K in their long run.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and again, that's not specific enough. But if you run a half marathon, 13 miles at 20 seconds faster, you can then do 14 miles at 20 seconds slower than the marathon pace. And so you can just see that the building blocks there. But if you go from like doing a 20-mile easy and then doing 16 miles at marathon pace next week, you're probably going to get injured. And a lot of people get injured in their marathon blocks because they make them too long. And they try to run themselves into fitness and too aggressively. So they're trying to increase intensity and mileage as well at the same time. And that's where things get a little bit difficult when people come unstuck. And that's not to say you can't do that with elite level of runners who are running 120 miles a week, but they can sleep in the daytime and things. And this is a big problem as well, is like we're talking about the structure of the week in UK athletics and Irish athletics earlier. People are just picking what elites do and then mimicking it across. And you can't do that because the lifestyle circumstances of people are completely different. So again, it's about you've got to train the body to be able to run. If you can get the body to do two miles up, 18 at marathon pace and 2 down, and you've ticked the boxes along the way in the marathon build up. What we do is we taper the long run down. We don't taper, we just taper the long run down and really dial in on marathon pace.
You said we don't taper. You mean we don't stop?
No, we don't taper as in the 10 days out or as a whole. It's just the long run tapers down, but it's always at marathon pace. So now rather than slower. So you've got your 18 at marathon pace, 16 at marathon pace, 14 at marathon pace, 6 or 8 at marathon pace the week before the run. So the body's just getting more and more familiar with it. So the funnels come together, and then even more so in those final 4 weeks, because you're tapering the long run down, you've got the space then to make sure you're doing decent midweek sessions. And again, this depends on experience and the age of the athlete and things. So the taper starts 10 days before.
So 4 weeks out from Valencia, I need to hit 18 miles at 6:48 per mile pace or 4:12 per K pace.
Yeah.
Accounting for the slight
different
buffer
length,
on the day.
Yeah. If you do that, then you're ready. All things being equal.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
Now that doesn't always work. Sometimes things might go wrong.
Yeah.
For example, in Valencia this year, while we had a great results from it, fantastic improvement from people, there was 1 or 2 where it didn't quite work, but there were extrinsic factors, not to do with the training, to do with things that were going on in people's lives and things like that affected that.
So based on your methodology, you should be in the shape of your life going into marathon training, not,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be using marathon to get into the shape of your life.
Yes, because that's how you get injured.
Okay, interesting. So this is actually a big one, because I guess most people who listen to this who might be doing marathons think, all right, let's do a charity marathon in April, we're in January now. April charity marathon, haven't really done much training, running for charity, going to get into best shape of my life, run a marathon. Why is that not, I mean, you kind of just explained it, but what do we do in that situation? Because some people will want to do it. Is there a way to approach that safely? Or do you just have to accept that's just you're just going to run the marathon, not race it?
Yeah, well, it depends, because you could have an athlete, you could have somebody who's banged out like a 3-5 marathon, say last year or something like that. And they
Those people probably aren't these people.
Oh, right, well, okay. Yeah, so,
just the average person, the general population.
Where I was going to go with that is you can run yourself into fitness in a marathon build-up. So, for example, if I got...
Is that only if you've had previous running experience?
No, you can still run yourself into fitness,
okay.
But you've got to do it in a safe way. So if somebody's a 4-hour marathon runner, you probably wouldn't put them on the pre-super base or the super base or something like that. Or you can do, though, if you explain to them that with that sense, the midweek session is looking for the long term. So you could use the midweek kind of stuff off the pre-super base and super base, but the long run, all you do is just extend the easy pace out, because they're not really going to run well off the back of that. And then you explain to them that gives them a platform then for the rest of the year.
Yeah.
And then if they were then to pick a marathon in December, or say Seville in the following February, you've got space there to improve, to get them to improve. But somebody who's wanting to do that, you need to, as a coach, you need to explain to them, it's not viable to run optimally like that.
So you're not going to make any improvements. You're just going to, wherever you are now, you're just going to kind of, you've got to figure out how to extend it to 26 miles.
They might, yeah, exactly, yeah. But they might make a little bit of improvement just from like running efficiency and economy by being more consistent with the training and running a little bit farther. But it's very rare that they're going to make big jumps off that.
Okay. Now you've done your marathon. What do you do after?
Right. First things first is a week off straight away.
Yeah.
And then in week 2, you come back with easy running, so like a 35, 45, 55, 65, and then an 80-minute long run. It depends how many times a week a person trains. Week 3, 65, 65, 65, and then 90-minute long run. And then week 4, then you can start to drop in. Like you could do something like a 20-minute steady just to see how the body is, and a 30-minute steady on the weekend in between the usual warm-up and cool-downs. Or you could dive back into sessions if the person feels ready for it. And we went through this on the course, the range of sessions, but that probably getting too detailed.
Yeah.
But,
so the headline is,
yeah.
You've got to take that week off.
Yeah, and that's the hardest thing to do with people as well. And the other thing is as well, people race a marathon and they think, right, I'm going to try and run a 5K PB, a 10K PB and all of this. But what they don't understand is that they're in marathon shape, they're not in 5K shape.
Yeah.
Now, some people do run PBs and things like that, but they're normally injured about 2 months later because they're burnt out. It's really important to take 3 weeks to recover from a marathon.
Okay. Is there anything else on the methodology that we've missed? Is that's an entire year's worth of training, which is amazing. I think.
Again, the important thing for the viewers and listeners is that they need to understand this is an outline.
Yeah.
The training, every single run that the person does, should be specific to them at what they need on that day.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for everything that's happening. And again, we're talking outlines there. Now that the way we just did the marathon, that I don't coach the marathon with everybody the same way like that, but that's a good, safe way to do it.
Yeah.
But especially, I mean, for the guys who are running 4 hours for the marathon, the hope would be if they've gone through a year, they're not running 4 hours, they might be running 3:30, 3:15 or sub 3. So again, that's the nuance on it, and the art of the coaching and what you would do with people. I think that's important for people. So that somebody who's running 4 hours doesn't do the pre-super base, doesn't do the super base, and then goes and follows that marathon build up, they'll get injured. They all build in a progressive, structured way.
Yeah, for sure. So I know you don't like these sorts of things, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let's say you're running 5 hours. If everything went well, what could you do if you're with a good year's training? Where could you get to?
Well, to me, a 5-hour marathon runner is the same as a 4-hour marathon runner.
So what should a 4 hour, if you're doing 4 hours and you think, right, I'm committing 2025 to becoming a really good runner, where can you end up in a year's time?
From 4, you mean?
Yeah.
At best, 2:55.
Oh, the absolute best.
Yeah,
average?
More than likely 3:30, 3:25.
Okay, so I mean, I don't think anyone's going to be unhappy with a 35-minute PB.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be 4 to 3:55. If you're running 3-4
No,
days,
no,
5 days
no,
a
no.
week,
And
you should feel like you're wasting your time,
and
right?
that happens with the shuffler who doesn't understand what they're doing. So they might have a coach who gives them 10 times 1 kilometre, but there's 1 kilometre the same as the marathon pace of the half. So, and then they'll get injured as well. But if the person can stay healthy throughout the year, and again, age is important here as well, because as you know, like your VO2 max is for one marker, okay, which is one scientific marker, which I agree with, although it has little relevance to the marathon. If your VO2 max is generally at its highest whenever you're in your 20s, and then the general rule is as you lose, it drops by 10% every decade. Now there are things that you can do to control that and stop that drop off, but that's generally what happens.
And so why is the VO2 max a good marker, but not for the marathon?
Because it's not specific, it's got no relevance to it. So if you look at, I was listening to Andy Jones, who's the beetroot guy, and he's I'm not sure of the exact title, but professor of exercise physiology or something like that at Exeter University. And he was on the Kipchoge sub-2. I think he led the science on that team. And he was saying that he was surprised about Kipchoge's VO2 max only being 70. He would have expected it to be higher. And that I think that's sort of pushed him towards moving into the thing that I always talk about, fatigue resistance or temporal flow training, which he hasn't got to yet.
Yeah.
But this is something, because I've been coaching in Kenya for years, and it's how we coach here. Whereas he's more Britain-based and probably doesn't come over to Kenya a lot. And not all the coaches would call it that, but he, it's something I've spoken about. A couple of years before he did on that podcast, that he noticed that with Kipchoge, his ability to resist fatigue was really high. And then that sort of feeds into the whole thing about the science being wrong, about H ions and things like that. But that's too complicated for this. But the idea, what you really need to do for the marathon is you've got to be able to sort of progressively and structured, basically resist fatigue. And that the way you would do that varies on the athlete. Like I wouldn't give temporal flow training, which is fatigue resistance training, to a beginner. In fact, I would say that, like a good example of that is Patrick Barry that I coach. He ran, I think his PB was 2:54, and I gave him a mild version of it. And then in Berlin he ran 2:36, I think it was. It's off the top of my head. And I've given it to a few people, and they make big jumps with it. But you've got to be careful, because you need a lot of experience before you'd move into that area.
So but
VO2 max has got nothing to do with the marathon.
Because it's more suited for short events, middle distance.
Yeah, well, again, you don't train VO2 max really, and a lot of even the exercise physiologists say this as well. Like you'll get coaches that give VO2 max sessions trying to improve VO2 max, but it's just a marker.
Yeah.
But it just so happens that, say, something like 5 times 1K at 3K pace is a very good indicator of what somebody's VO2 max is, or a way of improving it. If you use multi-pace training, which we covered on the course, stuff a bit faster and a bit slower. So something that's faster than VO2 max pace. But you don't want to be training VO2 max. But what you'll find is that elite level middle distance runners have probably pretty high VO2 maxes, because they're working in that area a lot.
So I've got to ask, obviously, because you just went through this temporal flow training, but didn't tell me what it is.
No, it's a secret. It's a secret.
What is this fatigue resistance / temporal flow training?
Right. So what you do is, it's hard to get. The idea is, in a progressive, structured way, you've got to get the athlete to resist fatigue. So I'll give you a bit of detail, because that's the outline, but people won't understand that. So you need to give a bit of a detail. So let's say you've just run 2:30 for a marathon in 2 years' time, yeah, and then we're going to look at temporal flow, and your injury history is good. You haven't had any problems. You might start somebody off on 20 times 400, okay, and that could be roughly around 5K pace. And then what I would do then the following week, you go 10 times 600, 10 times 400, and then the next week you might go 10 times 800, 10 times 400, 10 times 200. But these aren't at paces. Okay, this is it's quite controlled, and then that develops into 10 times 1K, 10 times 400, 10 times 200. So you've got 10 miles, roughly 10 miles worth of work there, at paces that are faster than 10 mile. Yeah. So and you get faster as you go through them, and then from there you might move into something like a 3K rep, followed by 3 times 2K plus 10 times 400, all in one workout. And you can progress these and build them. So they're just resisting fatigue. The body's adapting to this, and they're becoming better at resisting fatigue.
Wow, those are
So they're midweek
brutal.
sessions. Oh, they're big sessions for the big boys.
And you said they're doing a lot in Kenya, this sort of stuff.
It depends within the different groups and things. I've not seen anybody do that. What I've just said there.
Yeah, yeah.
This is something that I've devised, but this is from years of coming to Kenya and attending and speaking to coaches and watching sessions. Like when I coach a lot of Kenyan runners, like I would sometimes Hosea, who's been pacing you, I did give them a session of 4 times 1 mile, 4 times 1200, 4 times 800, 4 times 400, all in one workout. I remember doing it down at the Tampatch track as the sun was setting. I think they were there for 2 hours and 10 minutes or something like that. But they loved the session, and I explained the benefit of it. But I didn't call it temporal flow then. So
Why is it called temporal flow?
that's a good question. They're great questions.
It's just a nice name.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was speaking to General Puffball, who edits my website, Michael O'Regan, and I was saying I need to come up with a name for this fatigue resistance type of training. And we come up with temporal because of space, time, and stuff like that, and then flow, so everything flows in. And actually, on my Strava group, I put the discussion that we were having through WhatsApp, Michael and myself, trying to come up with this name.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the best posts we've put on Strava because you can see, because Michael's a great writer.
Yeah.
And obviously I write as well. And the way that our brains kind of worked to get to come up with a name to coin the phrase temporal flow.
Okay, so you got that session in the week, and then on the weekend, is it?
No, that's nothing to do with temporal flow. Well, it is when you get to, I suppose, marathon training, the way I do it is a bit like temporal flow because you're progressing in a structured way and developing and resisting fatigue.
I was going to say, a lot of it sounds like fatigue resistance.
It is, yeah.
Even if it's at a more basic level.
Yeah, and even like, say in the marathon bridge, when I do the longer reps, I probably give the volume of the training sessions that I give people are probably a lot higher than what other coaches do, because most coaches work around the old-fashioned stuff of VO2 max and and Horwell's multi-pace training, whereas most of the sessions I give people will probably be around 40 minutes in terms of the actual volume of the session, but it's done a little bit slower. And then if I want something faster, I'll go down to 20 times 1, like I said before, because it's safe. And then if it's a 10K type session, it might be 30 to 35 minutes worth of volume, depending on the length of the rep.
What's your thoughts on like VO2 max workouts? I know the term's not right, but I guess like the faster sessions to help cadence turnover closer to a marathon. Is there any value in it?
No, none whatsoever. Because you don't want that. You want the body biomechanically to be running comfortably at marathon pace and feel good. You could put in, that's a good question actually, the more I think about it, because say for example we were doing the marathon build up, and the way I said you just keep the midweek session around the 10-mile effort, half marathon effort, but if they weren't able to hit those paces or not hitting the marathon paces, that's where you could drop a yo-yo in, not the hill blast necessarily. You might throw strides in, or a 20 times 1 minute session just to get a bit more cadence speed. So that would work, but I wouldn't give a VO2 max session because of the intensity of it. VO2 max sessions are really, really hard to do. Like 5 times 1K at 3K pace off a 2-minute recovery is a very, very tough session. That's what a middle distance runner would use, and it's kind of eyeballs out.
Yeah, fine. So you talked about a lot of your runs are quite hefty. Talk about mileage and how you find your optimal mileage. Are you looking for a sub 3-hour marathon goal? Are you looking for a certain mileage? I'm assuming everyone's mileage is different, but you said like no one needs to run 100 miles a week, but where does is there a sweet spot for someone to sort of sit in if they want to have any chance of breaking 3?
Nope. Again, people just get het up on this whole mileage thing. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of mileage, especially with the faster end runners. Like I would when I was coaching Aoife Cook for the Olympics, I monitor mileage on her feedback and things like that. And we found the sweet spot for her, for example, was 116, and she never got injured in the whole time that I trained her from a running related injury from overtraining or anything like that. But when she started with me, she was running 60 miles a week, and she said she'd get injured if she did any more than that. Within 4 or 5 months, she was on 100 miles a week, because the mileage isn't important. It's the balance of the mileage in the sessions and the type of sessions that you're doing. But to break 3 hours, I don't look at anybody's mileage in the group, because I know no one's doing too much, because the way it works is 65 minutes is the maximum somebody does for an easy run, and then they do their workout. Now, it depends whether somebody runs 4 times, 5 times, or 6 times. So I've got people who might run 6 times a week, who might run 258. I've got people who run 4 times a week who might run 258. Again, that depends on the individual and how the year's gone. There's so many factors that go into that. But in a nutshell, you don't need to be running more than 50 miles a week to run a sub 3-hour marathon.
Really? 50 miles, that's about 80K?
Yeah, you don't need to be running more than that.
Yeah.
I've got people running 80k, which is, I've got people running about 80k that can run sub 230 and they only run once a day. James Whittington went from 252 to 228.35 and he was sick when he ran the 230 in the space of a year, and he only ran 5 times a week.
Wow, okay.
And he was running, I think if I remember rightly, he sent me a WhatsApp message because we looked at this, and his average mileage for the year, basically was 50 miles a week.
Wow, okay.
And that's a sub 230.
Yeah. Okay, so you don't need to start doing double days,
No.
going out for runs in the evenings and all that sort of stuff.
No, I see a lot of this, and I just think like the people are going to get injured. They don't know what they're doing really.
Yeah.
They'd be better off spending half the time with their family. Maybe that's why they run the 100 miles a week. They want to get out and get away. In fact, that's what James did, because his wife, they had 3 babies and he needed some headspace, and that's why he started running to get out and have a bit of his own time.
Yeah.
And in fairness, he had a big job where he was working long hours as well.
Yeah. Why 65 easy?
See,
anyone who's gone.
Yeah. To kind of explain that, we're going to have to go into 35, 65, 95, 205.
Give that headline overview, because anyone who's worked with you has always wondered, why am I doing 65 easy?
I explain it to them. I tell them as well. So basically, between 35 minutes and say 55 minutes up to 60 minutes is pretty much the same. You're not going to get much more benefit by running 55 minutes than you do over 35 or 40.
From an aerobic perspective?
Well, from a physiological point of view, okay? But having said that, obviously you build people up to that. But once you get to 60 minutes or 65 minutes, there's physiological benefits that you don't get if it's shorter. But you've got to be recovering in time to be able to do the workout. So a good example is John on the course that we've been talking about him. He's 64 and he's looking to break 3 hours for the marathon, which he will do. And what we noticed was, like, even though he was only running 5 times a week, he was running 5 or 6, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6, he was doing the 65 minutes and he was struggling to recover. So we had the discussion, do we drop it, take an extra day's rest day, or do we cut the 65 down to 45? And when I explained the benefit of the 65, we kind of decided it's better to give him the extra rest day. So we dropped in the extra rest day, and that's something I'll be talking to John, next week about his training and how we're going to get him to get the sub 3 age. I don't know what he is now, 90 or whatever he is, 64 or something like that. So, but so the benefit of that 60 to 65 little window there, you get more physiological benefits than the 55, but as long as you can recover in time. And then the same goes with the 90 to 95. So, like, the reason, once you go beyond 65 minutes, for most people, and I'm not talking about elite runners now, they're getting diminishing returns, they're increasing the risk of getting injured, and then they're going to be taken away from their workouts because they're not recovering, they're now adding stress.
Yeah.
So, but you do find, say, with Kenyan runners, they might run 80 minutes in the morning and then 45 minutes in the evening, but then they're sleeping half of the day, whereas most other people are going out to work, dealing with kids and things like that. So it depends where somebody is on the spectrum of time. Really.
Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame when you're dealing with the average person, because the stress cup, so to speak, is always overflowing.
Yeah,
or about to
I like
overflow.
that. So I'm pinching that one as well. You've got some nice little phrases, actually. I'll be sealing them. I'll get a few more off you before you get home. But then that also then works for 2 hours and 5 minutes as well. So you'll notice I don't give anybody a run longer than 2 hours and 5 minutes in the group, unless they're in marathon training or ultra training. Yeah. So it's the same sort of principle, really.
Okay. Now, how do you think about marathon performance over the space of a few years? Like, how do you periodize it? Are you thinking year blocks, 3-year blocks? How does that look?
Yeah.
Let's say I'm thinking, all right, hit this sub 3. What am I then thinking next 3 years?
Yeah. So with that in mind, it's a bit difficult to plan that far ahead, but because so many things could happen, you've got to get the year done first. And I think it's at that point then. So let's say you broke free, say you run 3 hours and 1 second in Valencia, right? Okay.
That'd be painful.
Yeah, I've had people do that before in majors because they got stuck in traffic.
Yeah.
And they felt they should have run 2:58, but there was traffic things. That's another story though. So what you need to look at is where the person's starting from, and then as they train, you'll see what type of responder they are to the training. So like James is a great example. To go from an 18:59 park run in June last year to running 70 within less than a year, it was about 10 months, 8 months. He went from that to 70 minutes, 71 minutes for a half marathon. And then he went from 2:54, I think it was, to 2:28 in the space of a year. So he's what I would call a good responder to training. And this is nothing to do with talent, which is another story altogether. But you might have somebody who runs 3:15 for the marathon and then they run 2:59. So for me, like, over a year, ideally what you're looking for is somebody who's consistent, followed the training properly, stayed healthy. 15 minutes is about the average of the improvement from, say, 3:30 to 3:15 to 3. So from 3, if you break 3, what I say to people, like a 2:56 is the same as a 2:59. So, or if somebody's done the 18 miles at, say, 2:56 pace, and something went wrong in the marathon, they ran 3:2. I don't look at them as a 3:2. I look at them as 2:56 because of the training markers. And ideally, you want to get as much out of the 50s and down into the lower part of the 40s, or even further into the 30s. In the perfect world, if someone's run 2:55, you want them running 2:39. You want to skip that area. And this is the area where most people get stuck because they don't know what to do with the training. That's where they start putting the mileage up and they think that's the answer, and it's not. It's just having the savvy and the know-how and the nuance on how to train properly and safely as well. So instead of doing 2 sessions in a week in a long run, you're going to get injured and burnt out. If you work off more appropriate sessions and the right recovery and adaptation, then people spring before and race properly as well, and they move faster. So if you run 2:59, like, all joking apart, I'd be saying to you, because you're young as well, I'd be expecting you, if you ran 2:59, to skip the rest of the 50s and the 40s and probably get down into a bit like what James did and Patrick Barry and a few of the other guys have done as well. You maybe like high 2:30s, low 2:40s. So over the course of a year, and then the next year, you're definitely looking at going sub 2:30.
Christ, sounds insane right now.
Which just happened in Valencia, and it's happened to quite a lot of people over the year. 232 people I've got under 2:30, and most of them started off well slower than 3 hours as well.
Crazy. Well, on that note, I've got a couple of quick fires here. Best improvement you've seen in someone you've coached?
Oof. I suppose the most recent one was Sean Geraghty going from 4:15 to 2:55 in 10 months.
That's insane, isn't it?
So what I'm factoring in there is where he was starting from, the time frame, and where he ended up. So I would say that would probably be the most, in most recent years anyway.
Most surprising result you've seen from someone you've coached?
Right, I've only been surprised in the marathon twice, because what I say to people is you can't outrun your training in a marathon. We had this discussion in the course as well. Somebody might run faster than their training, but it's because they haven't been training properly. So they might have. It's possible that somebody could outrun the training to some degree. But I coached a woman called Savannah Berry in the US, and she finished 10th, I think, in the US Olympic marathon trials in the last one. But in the previous one, in the race to qualify, she ran, I think it was 2:44. Which was a qualifying time because it was at 2:45 at the time. She was running 20 miles a week, 15 miles a week. So that's the biggest surprise I've seen.
Wow. That's
2 or 3 times a week.
That's a lot of bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Biggest difficulty or problem you encounter when someone has plateaued and you're trying to break them through?
Sorry, say that again?
Biggest difficulty or problem you encountered when someone has plateaued and you're trying to break them through?
I think with the plateau, it's not necessarily about the training. It's more about extrinsic factors. If I'm coaching them because I look at the training in such detail every single week, and the way that the stuff's done in a progressive way, most people will improve unless they get injured or sick. That's normally the main thing, or something's happening with their family, or their jobs change. They're the more relevant things to look at with plateau, or if they've come to me from somebody else, I would look at the training history and then, excuse me, and they're normally been using zone 2 training and threshold training. That's where people plateau the most, in my experience.
So when you review someone's training, what are the top 3 mistakes you see in their training build-up?
Lack of specificity. So that could be just doing VO2 max sessions, long, slow runs. That'd be the first one. Making the block too long so the person gets fatigued and injured, and being too aggressive in the build-up.
Okay, cool. And then more quick fires. I'm going to go through all the things that are kind of outside of the training, all the things that kind of make up a runner's life. So the first is treadmills. What's your thoughts on treadmills? Yes, no?
Yes.
Can they be useful?
Yeah, they can be useful, yeah. Like I mentioned on the previous podcast that I've only ran on a treadmill once and I fell off trying to impress the Oxford University's women's rowing team. And it cut out and I went over, I was running at 5-minute mile pace and went over the bar. So I don't run on them. I find I didn't agree with them. So even if it was wintry and frosty and icy and windy and stuff like that, I'd still go out and do my workouts.
Yeah.
But we were a lot tougher back then. I know you lot are now, where we program watches and this HRV stuff. But in all seriousness, treadmills are great. Yeah, like I coach people in the US, in Utah, and they get loads of snow. So if you use the treadmill in the right way, then say you've got a workout and there's a storm outside, it's daft to go out and do a workout in the storm, rather when you could do it on the treadmill and get the same stimulus really. So
Okay.
yeah, they have their place definitely.
Yeah. I was thinking the same, just for weather
Yeah,
purposes. Yeah,
yeah.
cool. How much do shoes matter?
Massively. Or the super shoes now, they're a big thing. But then again, you get a lot of people running 4-hour marathons in alpha flies, and it's just bonkers. So you can just see the feet just completely collapsing in and stuff like that. So I think the key thing with shoes is finding a shoe that you like, and that's done as a daily trainer. But people shouldn't really be wearing super shoes for daily training. I mean, I've seen people running 10-minute mile pace in super shoes, and I just think, what are you doing? They've got more money than sense. So, but no, the shoes are important, definitely.
Okay. Fueling. How is it important to fuel for a marathon?
100%.
When you're training?
Again, the
When
two...
should you bring it in, I guess is the question.
Oh, okay. I was
Yeah.
just going to say the two big things in the improvements that people are making in the marathon at the moment, if we take training out of it, are the shoes and the fueling, because now with Morton Precision Hydration, Mountain Fuel, and things like this, when you should bring it in, I suppose, if you've used a product before and you're okay with it, then and because it's expensive as well, you kind of have to try to work out that balance really. But I would say if you're doing something like two up 12 at 20 seconds, slower the marathon pace of 2 down, you don't need to from a fueling point of view. Although you might want to use it just so you start getting used to it. I'd say it's when you're getting over the 2-hour mark. The run's going to take you over 2 hours. That's the time when you want to start, especially when you do marathon pace work, because you've got to get used to fueling at marathon pace as well.
Okay. So that's fuel covered, shoes covered. We've covered injuries. So I don't want to go. There's so many. That's a podcast in itself. Going through running injuries. But let's discuss S&C. Does it actually help? Does it matter? Does all my body morning work interfere with the running? Talk about weights and weight training for runners, basically.
Yeah, okay. I think this is one of the biggest con jobs going. Like, runners shouldn't be lifting weights unless they go into the Olympics in the 800, 1500, 5000. They don't really need to, because as you know, as a strength and conditioning expert rather than a coach, is that most people can't lift properly anyway. And I work for Fitness First and for Premier Training, and working with people with personal trainers, and I did strength and conditioning at Oxford University, looking after sports teams. Even the rowers and things like that, they can't lift properly, so they're going to damage themselves. Also, like, lifting is a workout. If you're lifting on a Monday and then going to try to do a workout on a Tuesday, you're going to get injured. You're not going to get the best out of your workout. So that's something else as well. So people don't know how to lift. If you're in the night team or something like that, they've got some of the best strength and conditioning coaches in the world working side by side with the coach, and they'll periodise the lifting and things. That's kind of important. But most people don't need to. But you do need to do a small amount of specific strength and conditioning stuff to stop you from getting injured. And we covered this on the coaching course that we're doing.
Just on that, let's say someone does know how to lift weights. Let's say I know how to lift weights.
Yeah.
Well, let's say, I guess there's two questions here: optimal results at the absolute maximum, and the sort of holistic picture.
Well, put it this way: if I had my way with you, I wouldn't have you lifting.
Really?
Even though you know how to lift, because it's going to get in the way of your training.
Oh, okay.
Because it's another workout.
Yeah, and that's even if it's done in
it doesn't matter.
Sub-maximal fashion. There's no seeing God or anything like that.
This is the alpha male in you trying to keep it in there. But no, I don't think it's necessary. As you know, there's 5 things that I give people from an S&C point of view, and it covers everything from the hips all the way down to the little toe. It's targeted, it's time efficient, nothing takes more than 5 minutes, and it does the job. So the idea of strength and conditioning for most people, from a running point of view, if they want to improve, is to reduce the risk of getting injured. Now, that's not to say if somebody's a lifter or like in the world that you're working in, that they should stop lifting to run. But what they need to do, that needs some nuance then, because obviously your guys know what they're doing, and they do different types of S&C as well. It's not just lifting, you do all the tyre stuff and the rope stuff and
No, we don't really do that.
I saw that in an event thing. I thought,
we did that at a special event, but not much in the day to day.
I think it's like what we discussed with you, trying to work a way to fit your lifting in with, or your conditioning in with the training. and the Muay Thai as well, because obviously you do Muay Thai, so you were doing Muay Thai lifting twice a week. Was it once upper body, once lower body?
Yeah.
You know, and then you wanted to do workouts and things. But then see, before you came to me, you were injured all of the time as well, and that was probably why, because of the alpha male in you, just thinking more is better or harder is better and things like that. But I think you're understanding now. If you look, we've kind of dialed back the intensity of your training, and you've shot forward. So it depends whether, you know, if the person wants to run a marathon, then and lifting's more important to them, then that should be the priority, and then you get them running easy, and just the coach has to work that out.
It just depends on the
individual.
Yeah, and if they want the aesthetic element to it. Because I know probably from a running perspective, it's probably not going to help that much now. For me, it's purely aesthetics.
Yeah, well, that's like Rob Colloon said to me, and whom your team coached him and changed his body transformation thing. Like he says, he didn't want to have a skinny little runner's body.
Who wants to look like a runner?
No, that's it, exactly. Who even wants to run? But you know that's important to quite a few people that I coach as well. They want to run, do well, but also be healthy with it as well, rather than being like a matchstick.
Yeah. Okay, those are most of the areas around running. Okay, so bringing it back to my journey, the goal of sub 3 in Valencia. It's January now. We've got 11 months to train for it. What does the journey look like? What's happened so far? And I guess the big question is, what are the icebergs that are in the viewpoint of your eyes and I'm completely oblivious to?
Yeah, I think if we start with the icebergs first, because that's where the challenge is going to be. And again, although I think we've gone a long way to solving that or overcoming it since you did the course. So I think the main risk, like 2 weeks ago, I'd been saying injury, sickness, like the alpha male in you, like pushing, thinking more is better. But I think on the course that you've done now, we've covered all of this and the reasons why you don't run when you're sick and how to reduce the risk of getting injured. And also, then if you're injured and then running, they would have been the things. But I think that you've probably learned about that on the course. So
the big learning I've had is the let the fitness come to you. Don't force it.
Yeah, don't.
I think I've already said to you. I think I need to reset my paces.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we had that conversation.
I'm resetting the paces on the super pace. But also 2 days ago, I was starting to feel a bit. I think it was altitude sickness. I'm not sure what it was, but I just knew I wasn't feeling right.
Yeah.
I kind of kept it under wraps. I didn't tell you. I was like, I don't think I'm feeling 100%. But I didn't run.
But I was meant to. I said to you, "Are you sick? Are you sick?" No, it was a bit of dust. but then I had altitude sickness, and a few other people did as well in the group as well. And it's hard to identify because you get a bit feverish and nauseous and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean.
Remember I said to you, I'm going to run at 5 p.m. I felt awful, and everyone was asking me, "Oh, you go for a run? You go for a run?" I was like, "Yeah." Came to 5 p.m. I was like, "There's no way I'm going for this run," and I called it off. And the next day, I also slept in and didn't do the run because I was like, something's not quite right, and I wanted to be fresh for the Moyburn Road. I'm glad I would never have taken those 2 days off 3 months ago.
Yeah, but you see, that's good because again, that's a process as well. Where it's through experience. As long as you learn from the mistakes, because this is the biggest problem that people have with training is they don't know what they're doing, and that's normal. Like if I wanted to play basketball, I wouldn't have a clue what I was doing, as well. And that's the same with running. And people search the internet for knowledge about running, and it was the same when I was young. I used to read Athletics Weekly all the time, but now you've got social media, and the problem is they're reading like influencers, and influencers haven't got a clue what they're talking about. Now, they're doing it for a different reason and things like that. So, but for yourself, I still see the icebergs as the alpha male in you, because I think there might be the odd time that you might, but I think that learning process is what the coaching is about as well, not just the course. What I try to do when I coach people is not just give them dogmatically say do this, this and this. I discuss things with them and get their feedback on it, and then work out the way forward. And that's what we do. I mean, you message me and I reply to you as quickly as I can and discuss. If I say to do something, I explain the reason to do it, and you say, yeah, okay, got it. Then you ignore it and you go out and run with a cold. But that could be one of the major icebergs.
Yeah.
And then,
to me, it's sickness, injury.
Yeah.
And it's still those three that you said: sickness, injury, and overtraining.
Yeah. And that's part of what my job is to make sure that you don't.
Yeah.
As much
Whether
as I
that's
possibly
because
can.
of other external factors like the business or just having a young child.
Yeah.
These things could
100%,
factor into it.
100%. Yeah. And then if you flip it back round to, I mean, the first part of your question was then about where are you on the journey and stuff like that. I think I kind of alluded to it in the previous part was when we were talking about you saying that you were on the slow twitch fibre in the spectrum, and I just knew that you weren't, even though you said you ran about 40 seconds for 100 meters or something. But it was just changing, rewiring you which we did with the hill blast and the aerobic
Yeah.
strides. And that has actually, to use the word I use a lot, is catapulted you forward quite substantially. For you to do that run that you did today on the Moyburn Road was fantastic, because you looked so comfortable for the first half an hour of that. And I think the only thing that got you was because it was at altitude coming uphill.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, that at the average pace for that run was the equivalent of well under free pace, and we're only in January.
Yeah.
So that's promising. So the key, if we keep you healthy and consistent and you follow the training and not be a naughty boy, then I think you'll go sub-3 pretty comfortably.
There we go. That's a wrap then.
Yeah, okay.
Fantastic. So we're in January now. I'm in the super base. Super base finishes around May. I've got a half marathon checkpoint in May. Goal to get sort of low 130/130. You might think
I
high
think you'll go
128.
faster. You'll go faster.
Okay, and then we've got May to September to get the half marathon even quicker to 125.
Yeah.
And then from September to December, extend it out and go sub-3.
That's it, exactly.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. John, tell us where we can find out more about your words of wisdom.
Yeah, I have my own podcast called The Stablemaster Speaks. It's a very short podcast, 30 minutes. Don't do much interviewing at the moment. It's mainly, it comes out every Saturday. It comes out every Saturday.
Every 3 months.
Every 3 months on a Saturday. But I just talk about training and to help people, really. So that's one way. And then I've got my own website, stazzastable.com.
And if someone wants to inquire about your coaching?
Stazzastable.com, there's a contact thing there. Just pop a little paragraph about yourself and I'll get back to you and explain how everything works.
Well, I highly recommend the podcast. I've binged on every single episode, listened to some of them multiple times. There's one particular one I'm going to put in the show notes as a great place to start. It goes into depth on the super base. So we'll put it in the link of the podcast here.
Brilliant, and thanks for having me. It's been one of the toughest podcasts I've had to do. Some tough questions in there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Brilliant. Well,
Excellent.
hopefully the
Enjoyed
view
it.
of the Rift Valley here helped, and you're very welcome. Thank
So
you.
a cup of coffee you're going to buy me now. That's what. No, brilliant. Thanks for having me on.
All right.